welcome back to the shop. A couple weeks ago, I did a video on, actually I was using this molding plane. I was working on the jewelry box, and I didn't have a video for the week, so I just real quickly while I was working on it, I made a little short video showing me using this plane. And that video is by far the best video I've ever made. It had the most views, the most likes, the most new subscribers of any video. It also had the most comments. And today I want to go through and kind of reply to some of those comments and answer some of the questions and kind of just basically just do a little more detailed video of a molding plane. So I think the best place to start would be to show the different types of molding. And of course there's thousands of different types of molding, but there are a few that are kind of repeated pretty consistently, and there'll be little changes in those types of molding, little details that'll be a little bit different, but for the most part they all follow some very similar design features. So I want to show you this. This is a book, Traditional Woodworking Hand Tools by Graham Blackburn. On his chapter on moldings, he's got this diagram showing the different styles of molding, kind of the profiles that they cut. And I actually have an example of most of these. So I'm going to go through, show what some of the examples that I have, and then I'm going to actually go through and answer some of the questions from that last video. Alright, so I've got a couple beads. Here's one, an example of what a beading plane would look like. Of course, they can come with slight variations. Here's one that has the bead, but it also has this this cutout, this flat spot next to the fence, which actually makes it a bead with a fillet and a quirk. This boxing is called a quirk, or the profile that cuts out is called a quirk. Here's a couple Roman ovulos. You can kind of see more or less what a Roman ovolo looks like. The plane I was using in the video that did so well is actually an OG plane, and it is a little bit more detailed. If this will focus, it has a little more of a complicated or complex profile. They also can have fillets and quirks and astragals or whatever else added onto them. Here's one. It's the exact same profile. It's just an OG plane, but it doesn't have the fillet that the other one has. So you can see that it's a little less. I'll show you the two side by side. These are identical moldings in terms of the profile, but this one has a fillet here on this side that this one does not. And and obviously it's smaller, but other than that, the shape that they cut is identical. These are both OG planes. I also have these, which are I would think of them as a type of molding, because they cut a design on the edge of wood. But these are actually table end planes for cutting the molding on the edge of tables. Actually, drop leaf tables is what these are specifically made for. So I'm going to go through and answer some of these questions. Somebody asked how they would have made the plane itself. Like, once you have this plane, it's easy to make the molding, but how would you make the plane to begin with? First of all, when it comes to making these, I think it's important to point out that there is a lot of different types of specialized woodworking. So what I do here in the shop would have historically been considered joinery. So nobody would have ever called themselves a woodworker. I would have been considered a joiner. Somebody who made planes would have been a plane maker, obviously. Somebody who makes buckets and barrels would be a cooper. You know, if you were making wagon wheels, you'd be a wheelwright. If you were making wagons, you might be a wainwright. You know, each different. Of course, there was cabinet makers. There was actual like timber framers, like guys who actually. And then of course, there's the guys who are, you know, working the pit saw and to make the lumber itself. So there's all these different types of woodworking. They're all specialist jobs. So I don't know exactly how they would have made these, because this isn't the thing that I'm interested in doing. However, I don't think it'd be that hard to do, because to me the hardest part would be getting the angle. Will be really the hardest part would be cutting this mouth out for the iron and the wedge to sit in, making sure the angle's proper, making sure everything is. I mean, that seems to me like the most difficult part of all this, and there are specialist tools for that job. But to make the profile on the bottom, I don't think it'd be that difficult to do, because these are just rounds, hollows, and it's a combination of rounds, hollows, and rebates. So you could use round, hollow, and rebate planes to make this profile. In fact, there are guys on YouTube who have videos showing you how to make complex molding using basic molding planes. But I think the person asking the question, how did they actually make the planes, I think they meant specifically the profile on the bottom of the plane. And like I said, I don't think that'd be difficult to do. It's certainly not going to be easy. But if that's your specialty, if that's what you do, is you specialize in tool making or plane making, I don't think it'd be that hard to do. And any of these profiles you could do the same thing with. This one, all you would have to do to make this OG pattern is take your hollow plane and make the rounded section of the OG, and then take your rounding plane to make the rounded section or the hollowed out section of the OG. Now, I guess the obvious next question would be, well, yeah, if you have to have hollows and rounds and rebates to be able to make the more complex molding, then how would you make these planes? How would you make the hollows and rounds and the rebates? Again, I don't think it'd be that hard. I think a rebate is just a flat surface on the bottom. It'd be very easy to make. The hardest part of it is definitely just getting this hole cut for the wedge and the iron. The round, I don't think would be that difficult to make either. You would just trace the profile of the curve that you're wanting on either end of your block of wood, and then use files and rasp to shape that out. Once you have the round, it would be very easy to make the hollow, because you could use the round to make the hollow. I mean, so altogether, I don't think this would be all that difficult. As long as you have a hollow, a round, and a rebate, you could make just about any variety of molding you could possibly ever want to make. And also, you could potentially, if you needed to, or if you were a specialist in the field, you could use these to make any of the molding planes that are specialist molding planes for, you know, a specific type of molding. So, somebody else said something about the amount of time it would take to do this, to use one of these. And another person asked about setting up the plane. And I think those two things kind of go together. So I'm going to show you how to set one of these up. This is the plane for cutting the edges on a drop leaf table. And I'm just going to use it on this little piece of scrap wood here. Make sure the iron is not protruding from the bottom of the plane yet, because you want to get it set up. So get your wedge hammered in and start tapping on the back of the iron. And keep feeling it with your fingers and make sure until you can feel that it's starting to protrude. All the molding planes have a fence, and that's going to be on this one, it's this part right here. On this plane in particular, there is no spring line. If there is no spring line, then the plane is made to be held vertically. So all you got to do is put the fence up against the piece of wood you're working. Press down, not hard, but enough to control it. You're pressing down and over to keep this fence up against the edge of the workpiece and to keep the cutting edge of the iron in contact with the wood. Now you can see and probably hear that it's not cutting right now. It's not doing anything. It's just because the iron isn't protruded enough through. So you just keep working on it and adjusting it until it starts to cut. Still nothing. It's starting to, you probably heard that, it's starting to cut now. You always want to start on the far end, not on the end closest to you. You start on the far end, and that will actually help, as you work your way down, that will help to guide the plane a little bit. This thing is just starting to cut, so I may, as it starts cutting, you work your way further and further back. And yes, I'm well aware that these planes are made to go in the other direction, but I'm left-handed, so it's just easier for me to go this way. So there it is. That's the profile for a drop leaf table. There's the plane I used to make it. You can see how the plane fits onto the wood here. So that would be kind of the basic setup. Like I said, you're just advancing the iron until it starts to make a cut. You check it, advance it, check it, make sure the wedge is tight. If you get too much cut, it's too aggressive, then you need to back the iron off. You can hit the back of the plane and that will withdraw, that will back the iron off some. So setup isn't really all that difficult. It's pretty, I mean, the iron either can only go two directions, in or out. So if it's, you just want it to be in just enough where it's making a cut. And that can be a little tricky sometimes, and some of these it's a little harder than others. And once that is set up, that will work fine for, I mean, days probably before it would have to be taken out and honed. And that brings me to another point, actually. Making the planes, the time it takes to set up, setting up. Oh, sharpening the irons. All right. Now that you have that iron, or you have this profile here, cut with that iron, the easiest way to sharpen that iron is to coat this in that green honing compound, or even whetstone slurry, or they make like a grit, like almost like sand you can put on there. It's kind of messy, but it works too. You can see I've got a couple different profiles that I have covered in that green honing compound, because that green compound is an abrasive. I mean, it's really fine, and it's not going to be, you know, it's not, what you get off of that isn't going to be extreme in the sense of the amount of material you're going to remove from that iron with this honing compound is going to be pretty minimal. So this is not, I wouldn't consider this to be for sharpening. If you need to sharpen the iron, you know, I would use little files or you know, like the little needle files and things, and just but you'd have to be very, very careful to keep from changing the profile too much or at all. But even a dull iron, because of the curved shape of it, even a dull iron will cut molding. So put your dull iron in there, cut a small section of molding, cover it in green honing compound or like I said, the powder or whatever it is you have laying around. And then, but then you would take that iron out of the plane and hold it onto, I mean, this profile will exactly match the profile of the iron. So all you have to do is hold it up at the angle that you want the iron to be sharpened at, and then just rub it down the piece of wood with the honing compound on it. And that's, like I said, that's the absolute easiest way to do it, because there's no, you don't have to worry about making sure that all the curves are proper or anything, because this is the exact curvature of the iron. So that you don't have to worry about like maintaining the different angles and all that kind of stuff. It makes it a little easier. And like I said, if it's really bad, if the iron's in really bad shape, you will have to use some files or maybe a Dremel or something to kind of give it to kind of clean that shape up. But if it's in pretty decent shape to begin with, like I said, I would just cut a section covered in compound and use that as my kind of like a strop, basically, to basically just hone the iron rather than sharpen it. So, sharpening iron, setting up spring lines. Somebody asked about why they have a spring line, why you would have to hold these planes. If you remember from the last video, I showed, and I'll show you here, some of these, especially the more complex molding planes, have a spring line, and that's that little cross that's cut into the toe of the plane. And that spring line is a guide for the angle to hold the plane at. So you would, the same thing with all of these, they all have a fence. They all have a fence. I don't know how clear you'll be able to see that, but it has a fence here. All you do is push the fence up against your workpiece, just like we did with the table, the drop leaf table plane. But in this case, you would look over the toe of the plane at that spring line, and you want this line here to be completely vertical and this line here to be completely horizontal. And that indicates the angle that you hold the plane at. And then you would plane down your workpiece while maintaining that angle. And somebody asked why that is. Why not just make one that's straight up? Honestly, somebody else, there's a couple other people, I don't know their names right now off the top of my head, but there was a couple other people who answered that question and did a better job than I'm going to be able to. But what I would say, what I would add to what they said, it has a lot to do with the size of the iron. If you were to make this profile, but you're holding the plane vertically, that iron would have to be quite a bit longer, and you would be cutting tons of material off on that longer side long before you ever even started cutting material on the near side. So what'll end up happening is that inside edge is going to dull at twice the speed that the outside edge is going to dull. Where this one, because it's held at an angle and the entire surface of the iron is cutting equally, so the iron is going to dull evenly over time, as opposed to an iron in a plane that would be held vertically instead of at an angle. I think that's probably about it for molding planes. This book has a lot more information in it. Graham Blackburn has an absolute wealth of knowledge, and I would recommend going to his channel and watching what he says, and also getting his books. So that'll be it for this week. I will see you guys next week.